Arsenal. Arsenal's name is probably the most literal one in the league and the coolest if you're into military stuff. It all started in 1886 when a bunch of workers at the Royal Arsenal in Woolwich, southeast London, decided to form a football club. Now, the Royal Arsenal was a massive arms factory making weapons for the British Army. So yeah, these guys were literally building bombs and guns by day and then smashing goals in the evening. Originally, the team was called Dial Square, which was a workshop inside the factory, but that lasted like 5 minutes. They quickly switched to Royal Arsenal, then later to Woolwich Arsenal to rep their area. But here's the twist. In 1913, the club moved across London to Highbury. That's when they dropped the Woolwich bit and became just Arsenal. Clean, simple, and kind of intimidating. What's mad is they were the only team in the league with a name that starts with A, which meant for years they were always top of alphabetical tables. And even though they left Woolwich ages ago, the military background stuck. They still have a cannon in their badge, and their nickname, the Gunners, comes straight from that whole weapons factory past. Aston Villa. Aston Villa's name is one of those names that sounds classy for no reason. Like, it could be a wine brand or a fancy estate. But the origin is actually a weird mix of church guys and a cricket club. So, back in 1874, a group of cricketers from the Villa Cross Wesleyan Chapel in the Aston district of Birmingham wanted something to do in the winter. Cricket wasn't a year-round sport back then, and these guys were bored out of their minds, so they started a football team. Now, the Villa bit comes from Villa Cross, the chapel they were associated with, and Aston is just the area they were based in. Simple as that. But what's funny is how random it all was. They needed another sport to keep active and probably didn't expect the team they started to end up winning the European Cup a century later. Bournemouth. The story behind Bournemouth's name is underrated, like the club itself, to be honest. The team we know today as AFC Bournemouth didn't even start with that name. Back in 1899, it was originally called Boscombe FC, named after a suburb of Bournemouth where the club was founded. Fast forward to 1923, they wanted to level up and make the name a bit more professional. So they went with Bournemouth and Boscombe Athletic Football Club. Yeah, it was a mouthful. Imagine trying to chant that at a match. That name stuck for a while, but in the 1970s, the club decided it was time for a proper rebrand. That's when they became AFC Bournemouth, Association Football Club, not athletic like many people think. They're also known as the Cherries, a nickname that supposedly comes from the cherry red stripes they used to wear, and the fact that the old stadium was near cherry orchards. Kind of a sweet name for a club that's always punched above its weight. It's wild to think that not too long ago, they had a tiny stadium, almost no money, and a name that people barely noticed. And yet here they are, making noise in the Premier League with one of the simplest names in the game, Brentford. Brentford's one of those names that sounds like a proper traditional English club. Like it's been around forever, and honestly, that's not far off. The club was founded in 1889, but get this, they were nearly a rugby team instead. The decision between rugby and football literally came down to a vote at a meeting in a pub. Now, the name Brentford comes from the West London town they're based in, but what makes it interesting is the club's nickname, the Bees. You'd think it has something to do with the name, but it came from a bunch of students shouting, "Come on, Bees!" for Brentford back in the early 1900s. Local papers misheard it and wrote Bees, and it just stayed that way. Brighton and Hove Albion. Brighton and Hove Albion definitely has the longest name in the league, and it sounds kinda posh until you break it down. So first off, Brighton and Hove are two neighboring towns on the south coast of England. Brighton was the more popular seaside resort, and Hove was basically its quieter, classier twin. The two towns eventually merged officially in 1997, but the football club beat them to it by like a century. The club itself was founded in 1901, and back then, there were already other clubs in town with similar names. So, to stand out and show they represented the whole area, not just one town, they called themselves Brighton and Hove. But then came Albion, and that's where it gets really old school. Albion is just a poetic ancient name for Britain. You'll see it in a few old clubs like West Bromwich Albion too. So yeah, Brighton and Hove Albion is basically them saying, we're both towns, we're proud, and we're British. It sounds formal, but most fans keep it short. In the stands, you'll mostly hear just Brighton or Albion. Sure, the full name shows up in club anthems and official songs, but on match day, it's almost never, "Come on Brighton and Hove Albion." That would take half the chant. Burnley. Burnley's one of those names that just feels like football. The club was founded in 1882, right when football was starting to turn into an organized sport. This was back when industrial towns like Burnley, which were proper working-class places, were the heartbeat of English football. The name is just Burnley Football Club, plain and simple, but that simplicity kinda hits hard. Back then, your football club was just your town's team. It was Burnley FC because the people of Burnley played for it, watched it, lived and breathed it. The club even became one of the founding members of the Football League in 1888, which basically makes them football royalty. Plus, Burnley doesn't need a flashy name, they've got a legacy. Turf Moor is one of the oldest stadiums still being used, and their name carries that same old-school energy. Chelsea. Chelsea's name is kind of a funny one because technically, the club isn't even in Chelsea. The stadium, Stamford Bridge, is in Fulham. But when the club was formed in 1905, there was already a Fulham FC, so the guy starting the new team wanted something close, something with class, and Chelsea sounded a bit more upper class. So they just went with that. The name Chelsea comes from the district in West London, which has always had that polished, upscale vibe. The club founders basically thought it sounded cooler. Like, imagine picking a name because it had better branding before branding was even a thing. But hey, it worked. Chelsea Football Club just hits different. And the thing is, the name gave them an identity that was separate from their actual location. It made them feel more like a London club with class. Especially once the King's Road era kicked off in the 60s and 70s, the name Chelsea ended up becoming a global brand. So guess they were right with that decision. Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace has easily the most random, most unique name in the league, and there's a legit reason behind it. The name comes from a giant glass and iron building called the Crystal Palace, built in 1851 for the Great Exhibition in London. In 1854, it was relocated to Sydenham Hill in South London, and the entire area eventually took on the same name. Now, in 1905, the football club was founded by workers at the actual Crystal Palace building and park. So that's where the name came from. It's not a metaphor, it's not deep, it's just geography. But here's the cool bit. They leaned all the way into it. The name sounds almost magical, and the club kind of embraced that identity over the years. Even the nickname The Eagles feels kind of mythical next to a name like Crystal Palace. No one else in the league has anything remotely like it. Everton. Everton's name feels super normal now, but if you dig a little, there's a pretty cool story behind it. The club was born in 1878, but it wasn't called Everton at the start. It was originally St. Domingo FC, named after a local Methodist chapel in Liverpool. Yeah, wild, right? The team was formed so the church's congregation had something to do in winter when cricket wasn't on. You know, the classic origin story. But as the team grew, more people wanted to join, and not all of them went to St. Domingo's. So, in 1879, to make it more inclusive, they renamed the club after the wider area, Everton. And that's how we got Everton Football Club. The area of Everton itself is one of the older parts of Liverpool, sitting on a hill with views over the city. Naming the club after it just gave the team a stronger identity, and it stuck hard. Even after Everton left Anfield, yeah, that Anfield, the name never changed. I'll talk more about the whole Anfield thing later. Fulham. Fulham is the oldest London club playing professional football, and its name hasn't really changed since the 1800s. The club was founded in 1879 by church lads from the Fulham St. Andrew's Church. They actually called themselves Fulham St. Andrews to begin with, but a few years later, they dropped the church bit and just went with Fulham Football Club. The area of Fulham is in West London, right on the Thames. It wasn't exactly bubbling back then, but it had character. It was full of dockers, laborers, and working-class families. So when a bunch of young locals started playing football there, they just represented where they were from. The name stuck because it matched the club's energy. Even their stadium, Craven Cottage, has that same homey, old-school aura. The club never tried to rebrand or dress it up. They remained Fulham through promotions, relegations, and everything in between. Leeds United. Leeds United didn't exist until 1919, and their name came from a bit of football drama. Before Leeds United, there was Leeds City FC, but they got kicked out of the Football League during World War I for making illegal payments to players. Payments that were banned while football was suspended during the war. So, Leeds needed a fresh start. A brand new club was formed right away, and they called it Leeds United, to represent a clean slate and the whole city coming together under one banner. The United in the name wasn't just a football trope. Liverpool. Alright, here's the mad one. Liverpool's name sounds simple, right? But the club was actually formed out of beef. Remember that back in the day, Everton played at Anfield? Yeah, but in the early 1890s, there was a fallout between the club and the stadium owner, John Holding. Basically, Holding wanted to charge higher rent and get more control over the club, but Everton declined and moved to Goodison Park. So now Holding had a stadium but no team. So what did he do? He made a new club. Yeah, just like that. In 1892, he founded Liverpool Football Club, named after the city itself, to fill the gap. The name Liverpool wasn't just a location, it was a flex. Holding wanted a team that would represent the whole city, not just a district like Everton. And it worked. The name gave the club instant recognition, especially with the port city booming at the time. What's funny is, Everton had the spot first, but Liverpool took the name and eventually became the bigger club globally. That split basically gave us one of the most intense football rivalries ever. Manchester United. Manchester United was never meant to be what it is now. Originally, they were just a team of railway workers in Newton Heath, grinding it out in their company kits. No flashy name, no Old Trafford, and no theater of dreams. Just a bunch of guys who worked for Lancashire and Yorkshire Railways kicking a ball around. But by the early 1900s, they were broke. Like, proper broke. Enter local businessman John Henry Davies, who was basically their guardian angel at the time. He bailed them out, and in 1902, they dropped the old name and came back as Manchester United. That name was all about ambition. It sounded bigger, cleaner, and more official. United made it feel like this wasn't just a team from a factory yard anymore. This was Manchester's team. Or at least that's what they were aiming for. Manchester City. Manchester City wasn't always the global powerhouse with world-class signings and Guardiola on the bench. In fact, the club's roots are way humbler, born out of social struggle, not silverware. It all started back in 1880 when St. Mark's Church in West Gorton founded a football team to help steer local men away from crime and alcoholism. By 1887, they were called Ardwick AFC, playing in the industrial heart of Manchester. But financial issues hit hard, and in 1894, the club restructured and rebranded as Manchester City, a name that said, "This isn't just a neighborhood club anymore. We're repping the whole city now." That name was a statement. Clean, civic, ambitious. And it stuck. For decades, City were the other side of town, the scrappier sibling in the shadow of United. But now, they've flipped the script. The name Manchester City went from underdog to unstoppable. And even though the owners and players may change, the name still carries that original promise, a club for the people, born in the blue-collar streets of Manchester, made global by sheer ambition. Newcastle United. Newcastle United also came from beef. Yeah, the pattern is getting weird to me too. Back in the day, there were two clubs in the city, Newcastle East End and Newcastle West End. It was classic local rivalry, but West End was struggling hard. They collapsed in 1892, and East End took the chance to rebrand and claim the city for themselves. So, what did they call themselves? Newcastle United. Bold, right? They saw the gap and just snatched it. What's funny is how perfect the name sounds now. It's not often that a name works out that well, especially when it comes from some sneaky local takeover. But this one hits different. Nottingham Forest. This one sounds like a fairy tale, and weirdly, it kinda is. Nottingham Forest wasn't named after some medieval knight or royal decree or anything. They were literally named after the Forest Recreation Ground, a big public park where a bunch of dudes decided to form a football club in 1865. That's it. The ground was called The Forest, and the team became Nottingham Forest. But here's the twist. That name ended up being iconic. Most clubs are named after towns, boroughs, or companies, but Forest was just supposed to happen, and no one else in the league has a name like that. It feels mystical without even trying. Another cool thing was when the club was starting out, they actually wore Garibaldi red, named after the Italian revolutionary, because, that color was hard and they were feeling rebellious. So now you've got a club called Forest, dressed like revolutionaries, kicking a ball around a public park. Fast forward, and that same club ended up winning back-to-back European Cups in the 70s under Brian Clough, from the woods to the top of Europe. It doesn't even sound real. Sunderland. Sunderland is one of those clubs where the name just sounds like it belongs in a football drama. It started in 1879, and what's cool is that the guy who formed it, James Allen, was a Scottish schoolteacher. It was originally called Sunderland and District Teachers Association Football Club. Thankfully, they dropped that pretty quick and just went with Sunderland AFC. There's no City or United or anything like that. It's just Sunderland. And honestly, that fits. The name doesn't try to dress itself up. It reflects the working-class pride of the Northeast, where it's football or nothing. It's a club that belongs to its people, named after the city, and that's all it ever needed to be. Tottenham Hotspur. Tottenham Hotspur is easily the most unique name in the league, and it sounds like something out of a Shakespeare play. The club was founded in 1882 by a bunch of teenagers, literal school kids from the Tottenham area of North London. And for some reason, these kids decided to name their team after a medieval nobleman, Sir Henry Percy, aka Harry Hotspur. He was this fierce knight in the 1300s who was known for his fiery temper and riding into battle with spurs on his boots. And since the area had a link to the Percy family, they just went with it. West Ham United. If any club name screams industrial heritage, it's West Ham. The club was born in 1895 as Thames Ironworks FC, which, literally sounds like a factory. And that's because it was a factory. The team was formed by workers from the Thames Ironworks and Shipbuilding Company in East London. 5 years later, the company-backed model ended, and the club relaunched as West Ham United. West Ham is the area, obviously, but United was added as a nod to the squad staying together despite losing the company sponsorship. Even the club's crest, crossed hammers, comes from the tools shipbuilders used. And the nickname The Hammers is not just a catchy name, it's part of their roots. Wolverhampton Wanderers. This team started in 1877, formed by two former schoolboys from St. Luke's Church School. They merged with a local cricket team called the Wanderers, and boom, you got Wolverhampton Wanderers. So the Wanderers part was inherited from the other lot, and honestly, it gave the club this adventurous, almost romantic identity that stuck out even back then. Wolverhampton tells you where they're from. Wanderers makes you feel like they've got soul. And speaking of wolves, the nickname Wolves caught on fast. It rolls off the tongue and it's perfect for chants. And that's how the 20 Premier League clubs got their names. Each one packed with history, drama, or just straight-up character. If you like this video, hit that like button and subscribe for more football stories you won't hear anywhere else.